Hey everyone, welcome back to another DePIN Masterminds. I'm Ken Anderson, CTO of Tashi, and I've got Michael with WhoLovesBurrito. Michael, say hi.
Hi.
Awesome. Well, as you know, we every week we try to get together and talk about what's going on in the DePIN space. Specifically, we're looking for the real value, justifying the business viability of various DePIN projects, our own included. So we often have to defend our own projects, which is awesome. But we're trying to create kind of this culture in the DePIN space of like starting with the business value first. And it kind of led to Brandon, who's normally with me. By the way, Brandon is not able to make it today. He's got some investor stuff he's taking care of. Best of luck to you, Brandon. Also, Merry Christmas. But I'm blessed to have Michael with me, and we're going to have Tyler joining us here pretty soon. I'll add Tyler actually right now. Tyler,
hello
from Unleashing DePIN. So we got a nice little crew coming together today to talk about what is the state of DePIN. As you always know, we're always looking for the real business value of projects. And so I think what Michael's put together, what I'll let him kind of share with us, is a really cool tool that helps us get a little bit of visibility into a lot of these DePIN projects. So Michael, why don't you do a quick little intro? We'll let Tyler do a little intro, and then maybe we go hop into your database and take a look there.
Okay, that's great. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our chat. Awesome to see you and Tyler again. So quick about myself and more about WhoLovesBurrito actually. So I am the purveyor of the WhoLovesBurrito DePIN database. What started out as a small hobby is turned into a little bit larger database than maybe I initially expected. Really just trying to provide as much information to people who might be interested in the DePIN sector as possible. Keep that up to date and give people the information they need to make informed decisions as much as possible. There are other similar aggregation sites out there. Each kind of has its pros and cons, and we work together with many of them, providing data back and forth, and it's a great relationship that we have out there in the DePIN space. So I'm happy to answer questions and talk about DePIN today. I look forward to it.
Awesome. And thanks for joining. Tyler, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and Unleashing DePIN? I was actually on your podcast last week, so.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. We all got to, this is the round 2 from the initial conversation that we had last Thursday. But yeah, quick background about myself. I've been kind of a builder in the Web3 space for, it's like getting longer and longer now. I was like, yeah, it's a few years. No, it's been 8 years or so now. And in any event, I got introduced to DePIN sort of the same way that others did through Helium. I thought, man, this is really interesting. It's somewhat synergistic to what my company's doing today. So, man, I thought I think this is going to be a big sector. There's going to be a lot of growth, and I wanted to get on the front lines of it. So I'd always had this inclination to create a podcast. So I thought, man, this might be the intersection that I needed. So I started the Unleashing DePIN podcast back in like September of 2022 at this point. And so we've been super fortunate to have tons of great project founders on, different contributors, folks who are helping push the space forward. And that's really been our mantra from the get-go, is to try to increase the visibility in DePIN, really increase kind of the education. So we've been working on some different tools and different research articles and whatnot, so on and so forth, to try to help push that forward as much as possible. But at the end of the day, we're enthusiasts. We're very passionate about what's happening. And so we're trying to do our part to keep that moving forward as best we can.
Awesome. Yeah. And so I know, Michael, a lot of what we're going to look at in your database is it's a fairly straightforward but comprehensive evaluation, a more holistic evaluation of these projects. And Tyler, I want to say, like, in our few chats so far, you focused a lot more on like how we evaluate businesses traditionally and how do we apply some of those same methodologies into Web3 projects, specifically looking at DePIN. So before we go hop into your database, Michael, is there anything you want to tell us about how you put it together? What is your motivation? How do people get involved? Like, tell us a little bit about that strategy.
Yeah, how to get started. It's a little bit of a meandering story, but more or less, I was just mostly curious, similar to Tyler. Started getting involved in a couple DePIN projects, kind of even before it had a name. Some kind of distributed computing or systems that were providing incentives for, doing what essentially was very little work. Install something and you're getting incentivized to keep it going and participate in the network. So the other thing that I wasn't very familiar with, I'm not a tech guy by education. I'm not a programmer or a web designer or any of that. But I find it all very interesting. And one of the things I wanted to do was learn how to design a website, how to run a website, how to get it going. I had done some dabbling in it at one time, but I really wanted to focus on it. And at the time, I was also, because of the interest in decentralization, was hoping to maybe even run that website on a decentralized server, starting with Flux. That's a story we can talk about later. It didn't go as planned.
Okay. I was
But
going to ask you, is it running on Flux right now? Because that'd be interesting too.
it is not. There's a long string of information on X about my
Got it.
trials and travails of working with Flux. I think just the product wasn't ready yet. They kind of pushed out the WordPress feature on Flux maybe before it was completely ready. It was having problems with syncing, and so my site would go down pretty often, and I'd have to rebuild it or do something like that. So it got to be problematic. But to their credit, Flux credited me back everything that I'd ever paid to them. Was very helpful in trying to solve the problems. We just couldn't get past a certain hump. And I said, I'll be back one day, probably when we're a little bit more suited. And so I moved to more traditional web hosting. But so when I was thinking about this website, I was like, what am I doing that's interesting, that might be interesting to other people or useful to other people? I mean, you can't just build a website just for yourself. It's pretty selfish. Like, who's going to look at it? Just me. I'm just going to sit around and look at my cool website. So I had this list of projects that I was personally participating in, like Helium, Planet Watch, a few others that I was starting to build up my own sort of project list. And I was like, well, that might be cool, might be interesting. There was no such thing as a DePIN aggregation site. I was definitely the first. So I just got all loaded up, built a website, started with a few features, a basic database, and here we are today. A while later, I think close to 300 projects, several other features we've added, red flag reporting. We try to log events. We have giveaway log, like all these things you try to track as part of the DePIN sector, and just to try to make, everything's always evolving. You want to be more useful than you were yesterday, if possible. So that's what we're trying to do to get it going. But that's kind of the history. Nothing magical or spectacular, just a guy interested in something and I want to try something new.
Well, why don't we go ahead and take a look at it here? I'm going to go and do a share screen here, and you kind of walk me through like what you want to show off. This is the main, I guess, database of
Yes.
the DePINs.
Yeah. So if you scroll up to the top to kind of get to the top of the web page. Yeah, so the main thing that most people go for is the projects list, which is listed under the menu projects. Obviously, if you click on that or go to that. So most people go here because this is the meat of the database. What we do is we're always on the search for new projects. We want to get as early as possible the projects up just so people who might be interested in getting early can access them. Well, there's Tashi, yay. Recently added. Yeah, there we go. Got some
made it in.
Yeah, so if you click on it, it opens up a sidebar and there's a bunch of other information about, whether it's been launched, the token is a mainnet, testnet, some links to socials, Discord, X, whatever might be available publicly. some other like token type data. If it's mainnet, it tells you whether it's a new project, something that's been added new. We filter those to the top so you can be ready to jump on a project early on. Links to how to get there, a little bit of description about what it is. So we keep this as up to date as humanly or non-humanly possible if we're working with AI or some technology. Obviously, in any database, the data can get stale pretty quickly, especially in a dynamic thing like DePIN where people are launching their tokens. There's new information, new socials, we change their website address. So we do our best. There may be some older information on some of it, but we try to keep tabs on what's going on in the sector and update that stuff.
Is there a project that you'd want me to kind of like zoom in on that might be like the ideal candidate or ideal example of like a project that is using or that is the data's up to date the most?
Well, certainly anything in the new is brand new to the database. I think what's generally a problem with the data is when you first get started, there's a lot of stuff missing. Not missing because it's just not out there. It's a new project. They certainly haven't launched TGE. So they might not even have a token. They may not even know what chain they're going to be on, right? So a lot of projects start with the idea they're going to be blockchain based, but have no idea which chain they're actually going to be on. So they don't have a token. They don't have a chain. They may not have all of their socials. They may later open a Discord channel. Maybe all they have is a Telegram channel at the moment. So all of the information in each project is essentially the same type of information we offer for each project, but some have a lot of information in them. So very mature projects, Helium would be an easy one to try to find. And then, something that's new on the list may not have everything put together. Hey, there's Helium with that. What kind of hardware is it, what chain it's on, the socials, documentation pages, all that stuff there. And then in the database itself, if you're out there, there's a bunch of pre-filters on there you can kind of toggle down. If you go back to close out the sidebar at the top there, where it's under DePIN, where it says status and category. So if you're interested in a certain category, and I don't get projects don't leave the database necessarily, even if they fail or something like that. So you'll see that little skull and crossbones on their status. Those are what I call the graveyard. So those are projects that have come and gone. They're no longer viable. I've had one project return from the dead, but that's been the only one so far to come back from that dreaded status of graveyard. So you can pick by sector, categories. One thing that's very difficult, or we find difficult, there are lots of people trying to categorize projects. And so if you look at Masari or any other of the aggregators, they may have different categories, different sectors. A lot of projects cross sector. They may not fall into a single category. So these are the WhoLovesBurrito sectors and categories. So you may not agree or it may not match with someone else's, but you can generally find what you're looking for if you have a basic idea of what the project is or what you're trying to do if you're just looking for projects that have it. There's a tab that says, well, which is the browser? Do they have a browser extension? A lot of projects have browser extensions that you can run. You don't have to do anything else except install them, and you can earn tokens by just basically sharing bandwidth or processing power through the browser extension. So that's kind of the primary tour, if you will, of the database. Just like anything else, you can click and push buttons and look around at filters and stuff to get where you want to be. But
now what is this section right here? Because I've seen this on a few projects, the KPIs.
Yeah.
Is that like a future content section?
Yeah, you'll find that some projects will have KPIs in there. So one of the first things that we did when we set up the database is like, well, the focus being, maybe pick out like GeoNet. I know GeoNet has a score, so if you can find them, you can use searches. Yeah, you have to close out the, so you can hit clear, clear that. and then you can do a search. Yeah, and just find achievement in there. Yeah, so click on achievement. All right.
There we go.
There we go. All right.
That looks amazing.
Thanks. So one of the things we were trying to do early on was say, the point of this is to make useful information for an everyday person. This is not about whether the business will fail or be great or anything else. It was just a rating, if you will, of how the project was at that moment. Looking at that from the perspective of, I'm an individual, I want to get involved in a project. How hard is it going to be for me to do the things that are necessary to get going? So, for example, if I just have to download a browser extension and then I'm done, that's pretty easy, right? I don't really be doing work. GeoNet, on the other hand, is an antenna. I have to go on my roof or on a pole or wherever I'm going to do that, risk my life climbing up there. And so the ease of setup score will be less than me just downloading a browser extension. So these are just subjective ratings on how hard it was to first install, what it takes to maintain it, and did I need any special technical knowledge to get it started. So if I have to load up a bunch of software and troubleshoot that software and fiddle with it for a week to get it to actually work, that's obviously not easy, right? So that gets a lower score than if I just turned it on and hooked it to my internet and I said goodbye and haven't seen it since. And then we calculate a value score based on how much the token is worth and how much you can earn per day. So that's your actual earnings, right? And then make that relative to all projects in the database, and then also make it relative to how hard it was to get set up, right? So the value to me is, how hard is it to get set up and run versus how much can I earn, right? So if it's really easy to set up and it's really, I make a lot of money, then the value to me is really high, right?
Right.
So if I have to basically risk my life, almost die, take a week to download software, get it to work right, pays very, very little for all that effort, that's the low score. That's kind of the scale. So for each project in which we have some personal experience with it, time permitting, we've tried to create some kind of value score or KPI for that project. Now, this obviously takes time and effort, and so only a certain amount of projects have this type of score, but you can find that if you scroll back up to the top of the website, to the menu, under projects, I think it is, if you click down on the projects at the very top and go to, sorry, it's under rankings, my fault. Project experience ranking. This is the second one on the list.
Okay.
Here you'll find a summary, kind of explaining what I just explained to you, and actually having the scores for the different items up there. Again, this is highly variable, and it's not meant to be, this project is going to fail, you're going to get rich. I can tell you right now, you're not going to get rich, but without looking at anything. But whether you're going to expend a bunch of effort to do something and get very little return, and again, all subjective based on some personal experience. Demo is generally been at the top because the token has a pretty high value, and you plug it in, you run through a few steps on your phone, and it's pretty much done, and you never have to see it again. I'm very surprised if I ever have to do anything with my demo device. Sometimes it might get unhooked from its connection, and I have to plug it back in. But my wife or myself kicks it loose for whatever reason. But other than that, it's the setup and maintenance is extremely easy. So it tends to find its way at the top of the opportunity or value score.
Very cool. Yeah. And then I noticed in the rankings, you also have the ROI payback ranking too.
Yeah.
The value ranking.
That's the other one that's probably people like the most if I were going to ask.
Yeah.
And we do present it every Friday as basically a top 5 ranking. We post that on X. So if you follow WhoLovesBurrito on X, you'll see that every Friday. Basically, we calculate out how much you can earn per day, right? The average, if we can, number of tokens you earn per day times the value of the token on the open market, and rank those based on the highest value. We tend to see a lot of the same projects that are pretty mature float to the top, GNet and Demo and Helium Mobile. Not only that, there's a lot of projects, a good portion of our database has not been through TGE yet, right? So there's no actual token that has any real value. You may be generating points and other things that aggregators like DePIN Pulse, Tyler can talk to you more about that, have a nice list of opportunities that also include things that are more non-TGE, and like you earn points or you earn credits or something that might convert eventually. But in terms of like real value, so real payback, if you will, you need a value of the token. You got to be able to sell it to somebody, right, to actually extract value out of it. So that's
so all of these projects here though have gone through TGE. They all have their tokens on the market. Okay.
Yeah, they won't be on this list unless they have open market tokens. Yeah, that's right.
I was going to say you can't calculate an ROI if you don't know what the value of the token is that you're earning.
This is true. I've tried. It doesn't work.
Well, and we've even talked about that in our team, right? So if you are going to do a node sale, it probably is ideal to do a token sale first and get liquidity in the market so that when you do your node sale, people can easily do this math for themselves and figure out, what is their ROI potentially. We found that if you're doing a node sale first and then a token sale, it's very hard to get excitement around the node sale.
Well, I mean, there are very few people that'll just blindly take the risk of like, well, I'm going to pay $200, $500, $30,000. There's a project on the list where the device is actually $30,000 without any knowledge of. It's like buying a stock but having no idea what the stock is worth. Like I'm going to buy, even with stocks you buy in IPOs, they give you an estimated value of the stock, right, that it's going to start at, and so you have some idea before investing. A lot of these times you're just going in blind, like, well, I'm going to buy this device. I'm going to earn points that may be worth $0 or they may be worth $100 a token. I have no idea. But I think that's what you guys focus on, which is the business a viable business? Is where that becomes important, because I want to look at a business that doesn't have a value on the token and say, well, are these guys going to be around?
Right.
Is it for the long term? Do they have a good business plan? Is the TAM, a reasonable estimate of what they can do? And then how's that going to relate to the token value? So I'm not a finance guy myself, so it's difficult for me. So I rely on other people to help me out. But
well, and this is for both of you. What are you seeing right now in the DePIN space as far as projects that are launching? Like maybe some of these newer projects we saw earlier. Like, what is their order of operations? How does the business look to you? Like, what are some trends you're seeing that are successful or that are meaningful or that you think we should be doing?
Michael, you want to go first? You want me?
I'm gonna pause to think. I don't know if you have something on your mind. Go ahead and say.
Well, I was gonna say there's two kind of high-level thoughts that pop into my mind. The first is that it seems like a lot of projects aren't rushing to launch the token. Like they're trying to build both parts of the network through kind of this point incentive mechanism pre-token launch. Is I assume it's just a way to validate that there is a compelling ability to drive interest on both sides of the equation there. So I would say that that's the first thing. And then the other thing that's been interesting is that in addition to projects prioritizing kind of, call it non-financial incentives within the network, it feels like there's not a huge rush or appetite to going directly to do the TGE, even for projects that have what I would consider a lot of success. Like one of the projects that I recently had on the podcast has a ton of customers, both on the supply and the demand side, like they've crossed it's Rome project. We blocks, or anyway, so Rome. But in any event, they've got like 1 million customers on their eSIM product. They've got lots of people contributing to nodes, and they're still trying to strategically roll out the TGE. And so, it's certainly one of those things where they're really prioritizing doing it right versus just rushing in and doing it just to do it. So I appreciate that thoughtfulness, but I don't know, Michael, if you have anything else to add.
Well, I'm actually not 100% sure. For obviously each project is different. They have their own ideas and considerations, but I'm not sure what the thought is in sort of counter to what Ken is saying, is like, why would you try to deploy before TGE, or at least be delaying it so long that it starts to frustrate people. Now, I know that there's a good batch of projects that we're waiting on Peak, because that was their selected chain, and Peak didn't exist as a chain yet, and so you can't launch TGE on a chain that doesn't exist, right? So there's that's one thing. If you've selected a chain that's just not available yet, and you want to give it a little time to kind of smooth out any bumps that it might have. But if you've already decided you're going on Solana or something that's pre-existing, then I'm not sure what the weight is. Whether that is a fear that you're going to do it wrong, and so you do all these things to like double check. You're not going to like basically crater your project at TGE for some reason. I suppose that's part of it. And I don't know if you guys have any insights in talking to other projects or your own project, Ken, thinking about that, whether a disastrous launch might potentially set you back considerably.
Yeah, I think that's probably the primary consideration driving when not to do a TGE. Like, I know specifically when I was talking to the Rome team, they're being very methodical around kind of orchestrating all the components that are required to do the launch successfully. The other thing, have you guys ever seen the show Silicon Valley? It's the HBO show.
Oh yeah.
So there's a scene, where Russ is talking about that he's the investor. It's supposed to be like Mark Cuban. He's like, revenue. Why would you go after revenue? He's like, if you don't go after revenue, you can say you're pre-revenue and you're a pure play. And there's a part of me that wonders, like, how many of these projects are building up there's like a pent up demand from people participating because they think the token's going to go really high, and like it's a forcing function for more supply side growth. I don't know if that's a factor or consideration at all, but I could see that being a part of the valuation process, if you will.
Yeah, and I can see, if you're building a network, IoT network, mobile net, Wi-Fi, whatever, that you need to have something to sell, right? And so if your network doesn't exist yet, right, you need to deploy prior to incentivizing with real tokens in order to have something to sell. It's chicken and the egg. And I know, having invested in a couple projects already that have failed because they lost the chicken and the egg battle, right? They couldn't deploy enough to make them look valuable enough for someone to buy their services before they were fully, had enough devices. And so if that goes long enough, you have a certain amount of runway, and then you're out of money and you're done, right? So
yeah.
Well, so what's your perspective on like a project like Aether, right? So Aether sold 66,000 nodes by April 15th. So they launched in, I think it was a March, or maybe it was even in April, they started their node sale. And the nodes were anywhere from, I think it was like $800 or $900 all the way up to like $1,500 or $1,600. But in the end, they ended up raising something like $130 million in just node sales. It was probably another 6 months before they released the checker node software. And the eighth token wasn't like, it didn't have a lot of liquidity and really didn't have a lot of value yet. But they sold a ridiculous number of nodes. And then you look at Peak as well. Like, so Peak took a different approach, right? They've got their token that's doing really ridiculously well right now. And they're still kind of, I would consider them kind of in that really early stage of going to market and getting adoption. But I mean, two projects that have done really well on the fundraising side. And the projects, I would say, when they did the fundraising, There are other projects that are more mature now, let me put it that way, who probably aren't doing as well on the fundraising side.
Yeah. I wish I knew the secret sauce, because wouldn't we all like to know? Like,
Yeah,
what I don't know what the difference is, because it's pretty impressive to sell, like, basically pre-sale that many relatively expensive devices. Like you said, they're probably on average around $1,000, and there are a few on the market where, that's a lot of money for just a person to just lay out no guarantee that that's coming back to them, right? That's what investing is about sometimes. But how do you manage to sell that many? I don't know, because I've seen other no-tails with similar technology or ideas bomb, right? Absolutely can't sell a node for the life of them. And if I knew the difference between those two, I'd be able to sell it to them. I'd be very wealthy. But I don't know. What do you guys think is the difference?
Yeah, there's a lot of different input variables. I mean, obviously, I know that as much as we hate to talk about it, there's the KOL consideration, like how much hype and
Yep.
interest are they driving? That's basically just, oh, it's a FOMO moment. I don't know if that necessarily relates to Aether specifically. I do think that the opportunity cost of participating in a project has like a direct correlation, I think, to people's TGE expectations. So if a project like Silencio that's been around for, I don't know, a year plus now, year and a half, who's on peak, like there's probably people are like they want the token to go live because they've been putting in all these man hours, but at the end of the day, their opportunity cost is different from, buying a hardware device that's, in the 4-figure range, or even in the lower figure range. Like I just bought a handful of Daba hotspots based on some speculations from a friend of ours named Andy, and I hope that they're not going to kick that down the road too far, because I bought enough. I'm like, yeah, I'd love to see this return come in sooner than later. But
I'm a season 1 participant in Daba, so I have a hotspot that I bought when it first launched, but it's been a long time.
Yeah.
But that's how these projects tend to go. If you're an impatient person, you should probably stay away from the pre-TGE projects. I mean, sometimes I've got another project, Function Land, FX Land. It's been 2.5 years since their original basically Kickstarter campaign or Indiegogo campaign, and people are starting to get frustrated. They've been frustrated for a while, but it's been going a long time, and it wasn't a cheap device either. So, that's, you have to be careful not to basically alienate all those early investors too by waiting 2, 3, 4 years.
Yeah, there's also a challenge between when you do launch early and things in the network change pretty dramatically. Like I think XNet is a really tangible example of this, where they launch and then they migrated chains, and so much with respect to the tokenomics changed as a result of that. And so it created a lot of extra work for the team and other people, within the governance committee to try to rectify those column issues or problems that existed. And so, we haven't found that equilibrium between time and launch, because there are a lot of these other, just, I don't know, factors that seem to be difficult to quantify, and therefore it's hard to base a metric around it. But certainly you don't want it to be 2 years, like you said. I wouldn't be thrilled if that was my money.
That would be pretty interesting data to look at. Maybe it's not correlated at all, but like project generation, which is generally when it hits our database, is pretty close to when the project got basically publicized out there, to the date of TGE, and whether that time between that had any impact at all on the price of the token, relative to whatever normalizing metric you have. Which probably is all over the place, but you never know whether does that long time increase the value by, like you said, Tyler, building up this this hype, I guess you may call it, or backlog of demand that might force the token to go sky high after that happens, or something like that. But
yeah, it is a catch-22, right? Because if you start to get opt out and people just get exhausted from participating in something that never materializes, then it probably has a correlation in the other direction, which can drive users out of the project. Like if there's always some monetary value, then you've got at least a minimum incentive to participate. But we're still in the early days of that data to run meaningful analysis.
I read an interesting paper looking at incentives. It was kind of focused on DePIN a little bit. It was about similar projects to DePIN and how you incentivize, because as you might expect, if you under incentivize, you don't accomplish what you want, which is to basically bootstrap, device deployment. Or if you over incentivize, then you've basically got a high expectation of future earnings that you're going to disappoint a bunch of people and everything in between. And we looked at it. They did a study on it. And there is, in fact, a sweet spot because if you over incentivize, you actually get less quality data. And if obviously you under incentivize, you don't get enough data. And so there's this interesting chart in that, looking at where that line is. And if you overshoot or undershoot in your incentive models, you're certainly capable of, I wouldn't say you'll kill your project, but you could hurt it and need to make adjustments to that. And that's the other thing, is you're dealing with human beings. Humans hate change. And so if you change your tokenomics because of that, because you overshot or undershot, that sweet spot, people just get mad one way or the other, right? I'm not making as much as I used to. Someone else is making more because of something else. And it just leads to community disarray.
By the way, do you remember what that sweet spot metric was offhand?
I don't know. I'll get you the paper. A guy I work with on some other research, it was one of the authors. I just can't remember right now where it was. I've got it tucked away somewhere. I'll send that to you though, because it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I would love to know that right about now. Right about now, before we start launching nodes and incentivizing people, I would love to know.
It's obviously a lot of theory, and they run like a test with people, like with fake incentives of some sort, and try to calculate what it is. But it's definitely something that someone who's working on incentives needs to consider, the human response to incentivization, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think back to what is the book? What Motivates Us, I think is what it's called. And it focuses on how to motivate sales teams, and it one of the least effective ways to motivate sales teams is with cash bonuses. The most effective, and the way that it positions it is you have to pay them enough to take money off the table. You can't have employees sitting around thinking about how they're going to pay their bills when they get home, right? So you have to pay them enough to take money off the table. That doesn't mean you have to pay them a stupid amount of money with benefits and all that stuff, but enough to take money off the table. But then it's was it purpose, mastery, and autonomy are kind of like the three things. And I think a little bit about how would you apply that to, say, a decentralized autonomous organization, like a DAO or a community of node hosts in node operators in a DePIN. Because I think, to your point, you have to have enough incentive to make it make sense. But at some point, you're actually incentivizing bad behaviors, which is what the book points out, is people will cut corners and cheat and lie and do all kinds of stuff to get the greater incentive if you put it there. I remember when I was selling insurance, I had my CEO said, for every flyer you get from one of our competitors, I'll give you a spin on this wheel during our weekly sales meeting. And on the wheel, there were 4 Ruth's Chris Morton's $200 gift certificates. And I had the best customers because I just took care of them. I was a very consultative sales guy. And I'm just like, dude, anytime anybody sends you a flyer, just fax it to me. And I would get 20 of these a day. So I'd get 100 spins every week on this thing and walk away with $1,000 worth of Ruth's Chris and Morton's. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know that this is benefiting my boss at all, getting all these flyers. And it's a lot of the same flyers. I'm like, I don't know if this is meaningful to my boss, but I'm going to get a lot of Morton's out of this. And so I spent a lot of time eating at Morton's from Ruth's Chris because of that. But otherwise I wouldn't have. But that was one of those examples of incentives gone wrong, right? I basically took advantage of the incentive system because it was available. And so if you over incentivize or incentivize and you don't have controls, or you don't incentivize appropriately, you actually incentivize poor behavior.
I think, Ken, your point is super valid and really important within the context of how we're looking at DePIN. Like I think Michael alluded to this a little earlier when we were building DePIN Pulse, which uses the WhoLovesBurrito database data. I think off the back of the envelope math was that the majority of project hardware ROI timeframes, if you want to call them that, I want to say it was like 3 months or so. And so if you compare that to any other industry, like buying an asset that returns capital in a short time frame like that is basically unheard of, and it creates this requirement that the network has to scale at growth rates that are frankly untenable in most cases. But because of the industry and comparables that we have, there's this expectation if you can't compete, therefore you're not able to even play in the same game. And so I think a little bit to the detriment of how quickly things started to increase in value on the early days with some projects that we're aware of, it set this unsustainable expectation that is how we're going to have to continue moving forward. And there's going to have to be a reckoning with respect to that, because it's just not long-term sustainable in 99% of the cases that I look at, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to paraphrase the question I get a lot, which is, well, which project is going to make me the most money, or how am I going to get rich doing DePIN? And I said, well, let's start with number one, is you're not getting rich unless you're able to scale significantly. You're going to deploy potentially hundreds or thousands, and this is going to be your business. Like running a single device at your house is not going to make you wealthy. Despite what happened early on with, say, Helium or certain projects that had early adopter, because it was new, everything was new, they over incentivized, as you mentioned. So what you want to look for is a project that will be consistent. And so, paybacks a year, that's fine. And if you think about that, every year after that, you're going to make essentially similar income from that. That's great, right? Because it's passive. You've set it up. You don't need to do anything else. You paid back your capital investment. And now for the foreseeable future, they're generating revenue. They're paying you for what you're doing, which is basically nothing except turning on the electricity and the internet and keeping it connected. Maybe there's maintenance, maybe it breaks here or there. But so in my mind, consistency is key. And that one of the reasons we also find it interesting when we produce that Friday top 5, if it's always the same projects, it's finding itself in that top 5 all the time. That's like a key to me. I was like, well, what is that project? Because they may not be 1 all the time, and they may not be 5 all the time, but they're in there somewhere month after month all the time. And like, I do very little. I just take the payments every month, and I think that's great. Yeah. So I don't have a great metric for consistency, but I think that would be a good one to add, right? How often is it in this range of value that I get paid every month? I think that would be cool.
Yeah, as Ken calls them, the annuity streams of DePIN is really what we need to be building.
That key, during our last conversation, that really keyed me up. I was looking for how would we term this, but that's perfect. A perfect way to put that, right? You want it to be consistent over long periods.
And I love that we're having this discussion. I'm excited to rip the Band-Aid off, because I look at how I want to build our tokenomics, and we're like dead in the middle of like finalizing our tokenomics right now. So so this is very relevant to me, but I look at this and I'm thinking, I can either give people a big pop right in the beginning and hopefully that kickstarts something meaningful, or we can be responsible with this and create a more sustainable long-term strategy that, where the token strategy kind of it peaks about the same time that revenues is taking over and becoming a sustainable model for keeping those rewards going. Because what I don't want to have happen is I don't want people to invest in whatever we do with Tashi and then in 6 months be like, okay, I got the maximum reward out of this. It's not worth it anymore. I'm just going to sell everything and go to the next project. I want people to have that thought of, oh, there's a $34 billion market here that's generating, $1 billion in revenue every year. And I get a piece of that basically for the rest of my life. And I think the total life value is significantly higher than, even if you do like a net present value calculation, significantly higher than what you're going to get in the next 6 months on some of these projects.
Yeah, I think, but there is something to be said for like a flood the market strategy, which was kind of Helium's strategy, right? If you want to deploy millions of devices really quickly, like give everyone a bunch of money at the start, get them out there, and then what people didn't realize is that works, but they're going to get weeded out eventually, right? So you flood the market, you have a bunch of devices that go out. There's a certain percentage that are good devices, like good deployments, good height, like they're producing a lot of good network data, and there's another 80% of them that are shit. And so those guys are going to get wiped away, but it was very effective in getting the good ones out there by flooding the market with tons of devices. And so that's definitely not for everyone, and nor should it necessarily be the strategy that everyone uses, but it was very effective at what they wanted to accomplish at the time. So,
well, and I see what Grass is doing, right? Grass is basically like, take this for free, earn a little bit, but it's like instant.
yeah,
right? They're making use of that data. And I think that's another way to flood the market, is just to be like, to your point, what has high value, like the ease of deployment, and you can start taking into consideration the return. Is it an immediate return? I guess return's the wrong. Your investment is electricity and internet, but the ease of deployment is so it's so easy that now you're just generating money for free almost. So it's you're at least covering your electricity and your internet costs, which is the important part.
I have a question for you guys, and so it's sort of strategy related, because I actually got one of those projects that I invested in ended up failing, but they started out with a device-based strategy, right? They're going to sell cameras or sensors or whatever. But when they took that to their investors, the investors wanted phone app, because everyone already has the device, so it's very low cost. You don't have to prototype. You don't even spend a bunch of money on getting devices built. And so they went that route. And so both failed, didn't matter, but for whatever reason. But I personally hate phone apps.
It's going to say batteries.
The friction, there's a lot of friction. One is I usually have to turn on the app, say, if it's a camera-based one, let's say even one of the like mapping ones, like Nadix or Rover or whatever. I have to physically get my phone out, tap, hook up, tap. So that's extra work for me. And over time, unless you're increasing your incentives for me, my apathy is going to grow, and there's going to be some point I'm going to plateau, and I'm going to stop doing the work unless you increase the incentives. So there's constant increasing incentives to keep people fighting the friction. And I just can't do it. I've got other things, and I just don't think to get my app out. And I'm the worst Silencio person out there. Probably had the app since they first launched. I've got like 200 points or whatever, because I never turn that thing on because I forget. It's not my nature to like get out my phone and stuff like that. But I'm curious whether you guys are. I know, Tyler, you talked about Disneyland's poor coverage and your phone battery dying so quickly because it's running things in the background. But are you guys regularly doing phone apps? Do you like them? Is that a good deployment strategy for some?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you my 2 cents on the matter. I'm equally empathetic to the amount of time that's required for me once an app has been installed. So like I'm in a similar boat. Apps like Silencio, I have to be reminded to go and actually take these decibel ratings. And so there's a higher propensity for me to not participate as a result of that. Other apps where they're just collecting data points in the background, I let them run my battery down, and that is what it is. And I'm okay with that because it is very passive. I think in terms of getting new people into the space, the barrier to entry is low enough where that can be a winning strategy for some. I've matured in terms of where I want my DePIN deployment businesses to go, which is consistent, predictable revenue with a piece of hardware that I can somewhat set and forget. I don't want to be as hands-on. And even if that increased my barrier to entry cost, knowing that there's potentially some annuity stream value that's coming as a result of that, I'm far more interested in paying something than just trying to actively map these different hexes, if you will. So I think I share a pretty similar perspective as you on that, Michael, but I'm curious Ken's thoughts.
Well, I mean, I have a friend who started a company in Singapore not too long ago that is kind of a Bitcoin mining sharing platform. And what they actually do is they rent the hardware to their consumers, but host it in their own data center. And what you have is you have an app that shows you your device with your device ID and online, and you immediately see your earnings. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, they're kind of like taking some of the they're taking all the decentralization away, right? All the management part of it away. But the funding of these projects, they basically have outsourced the funding of it by renting it to these users. And because they're mining Bitcoin, they're getting Bitcoin at a fraction of what the market price is going to be through a mining process. And Bitcoin's going up. So there's like a whole bunch of reasons why this makes sense. But I was thinking about like, why would anybody do this? And the reality is like, you put in a credit card number, you buy a number of or you rent a number of these devices, and immediately you see your Bitcoin value going up. Like the next day you have deposits. And it's like, it's convenience and immediate rewards is what people are looking for if you're trying to appeal to like a mass adoption. Now, if we can do that in a way where you're not only getting immediate rewards, but you're getting consistent rewards. And I think to Tyler's point, it's that set and forget. That's part of the convenience model, right? So if we're hosting our own hardware and we're truly trying to be decentralized, there's a little bit more of a barrier to entry. But I think about that model and I'm just like, oh, interesting. So we've been thinking of maybe a little bit of a hybrid of that, of like, we want to have at least 50 devices in every city that are hosting Tashi that have public IP addresses available for everybody to use as a gateway for their games. So we think, okay, well, if you're not one of those 50, if you're one of the people who's like, I don't really want to make my IP public, whatever the reason is, maybe you could participate in paying into one of those devices and getting the rewards out of those devices. So now you're kind of by proxy hosting and facilitating physical decentralization, because the extreme of this is what this guy is doing in Singapore, what my friend's doing in Singapore, which is we're just going to host everything and you just pay us to like offset our cost. And the other end of that extreme is, okay, now you're going to pay us to buy our hardware and you're going to host it and you're going to take all the burden, and then we're going to sell the data and share the revenue with you. And I think the hybrid, the in-between is maybe there is a self-hosting strategy that also allows proxies to participate in that hosting
Ken, personally, I think that's an incredible recipe for success. Like so far, most projects we've seen with apps, it's to supplement data capture that coexists with hardware. It's not, do you have, sort of you're creating your own business or economic model where maybe you incentivize some people to go out and build the business around actually having those 50 locations within a city, for example, and then you can allow everyone else to participate by proxy, and you get the best of both worlds. Like as a DePIN customer of so many different projects, I'm wildly interested in that. Frankly, the reason I got as many DABA, I didn't get a ton, but the reason I bought as many DABA hotspots as I did is because they're the ones that goes and sets it up in places with high traffic where their customers are already trying to use the network. As someone who's deployed at this point well over 100 of Wi-Fi access points between Helium and XNet, it is a cumbersome amount of work. I mean, it's almost a full-time thing that you do on the weekends to try to go out and facilitate that. It's I'm very excited to let someone do that legwork, pay them a percentage of it, because it's just, capital out, hopefully more capital in from my vantage point.
Yeah. And with GeoNet, I mean, when I was doing just like the napkin math on GeoNet, I'm looking around like my part of California. I'm like, there's like 500 grids that are untapped right now. Yeah. I'm like, if I could put a unit in each, if I could even do 100 of those, I can make so much money every month. And then I started thinking, how am I going to find the land and the electricity and the Wi-Fi, and who am I going to partner with? And like, obviously I have to find somebody I'm going to pay them almost an easement fee to use their property to put this stuff on there. And I'm like, I can probably fill in 5 grids with people I know, but like the rest of the other 95 grids, I'm going to have to make this a full-time business. I'm like, maybe maybe I'll just focus on just having one at my house and at my parents' house. Maybe I'll just focus on the 5 that I have easy access to. But beyond that, I was just like, because I was even thinking, I was like, man, I could be making, 30,000 a month on GeoNet income if I saturated that. But I'm just like, the amount of work it takes and potentially you're basically running a business at that point. But if we can figure out a way to systematize that, to make that part of the incentive structure. And
I know that like GeoNet will offer super hexes, which is try to like drive installments into places of need, and a lot of projects are taking that on. There are deployers out there, and I think that's a legitimate business. Just think if you had those 500 open spaces and your job was to go out there and find a place to put those things and get them launched up. I mean, obviously that is a full-time job, but I think that's valuable for projects like that, is that you do have a system, or you should support deployers in some way as a project to help them to accomplish that goal, because that's not something you want to do personally. But if you own a project, you want someone else doing that work, because that's how you get wide distribution, because those guys aren't looking for the house down the street, like that they might know their neighbor. They're looking at where can I optimize earnings, and that means putting in places where they're not. And so how do I get those locations? And so a little plug for WhoLovesBurrito, if you don't mind. Have a new product probably coming out soon, which is basically a matching program where deployers go in, put what their deals are, hosts can go in and put host requests, and we match those together and alert both sides. And
I'm so excited to hear that, Michael. So okay, so I almost built the same thing like 4 or 5 months ago when I had so much extra hardware. And I'm like, man, I'm just having a hard time finding locations to get this deployed. And I found a site that had tried doing this, I think maybe 2 years ago, but they're probably too early. I think that can actually really work now. And I have 0 extra bandwidth to build things. So please make that happen, Michael. I will sign up day one. Be a very good customer of yours, I hope. Little extra.
And we're not charging you much, like the deployers pay, but it's like a monthly, like $10 fee to get access to all of your matches and stuff like that, at least starting out. So we don't have a lot of hosts yet. So we're going to have to work
Tinder for
really hard to get
Here
hosts,
we go.
Which will be that's the whole thing, right? We're going to have to incentivize hosts too. So we're going to give tokens or whatever to try to get more hosts in, which makes it valuable to deployers. But there are sites out there that do matching for deployers, but they tend to be commercially focused, right? They're not focused on the one person type of deal. So I think it does lack. Someone probably did try it and couldn't get hosts and deployers because there weren't that many out there. There's some bigger ones that look at commercial sites, and like it's $1,000 a month to access this matching for some of these like telco Wi-Fi connections. And so I'm like, I don't know anyone that can afford that. So WhoLovesBurrito is all about the individual, like what can they do to earn something, and what if they don't want to do the work of climbing on the roof and installing an antenna, put your host request in, and someone will split the money with you, no problem. They'll come out and put it out. And so hopefully we'll get that launched sometime soon.
Next week,
possibly. We also, who else?
So much of this.
Yeah, who else is interested in it? Projects.
I imagine.
I talked to a couple guys,
absolutely.
They're like, how do we connect to deployers? I'm like, well, I'll build onto my side a project area. You go in and say, bulk pricing. If you buy 100, we'll give you, $100, whatever it is. You go and put your deals in, and I'll match you with deployers. Deployers match with hosts, and we got a nice little flywheel going, and everyone's happy. And of course, that's more work for me. I'm kind of like Tyler, and don't have the actual bandwidth to do it, but I'm going to throw it out there that we might try, just because why not? It's just something cool. But
we had something similar to that in telecom, where it's called channel sales. So it's all the indirect sales from the telcos. And so you would have electricians, you'd have all kinds of building contractors who are like, hey, listen, we're going in and we're doing a job that we're getting paid for. But because I know my customer also needs to have their telephone service, we're going to offer that from like 3 different telcos in these areas. And they do all the setup and all the wiring and get it all up and running. But it's like fundamentally they were an insurance adjuster, or sometimes they'd be attorneys, sometimes they'd be electricians. It'd just be like somebody who's like, can I sell something in addition to the services I'm already selling? So I think that's being able to be like, hey, listen, you're already a roofer and you're already on roofs.
Yeah.
Why don't we also make you a deployer?
Yeah.
Since you're already up there. How do we match those skill sets and those people?
I don't know if you guys are familiar with EnviroBlocks, but that was basically their origin story, which was he was in the roofing business, if you will, and thought, man, there's such an opportunity for us to set up these sensors specifically in attics because we're always getting called out after there's been a leak and mold develops and whatnot. And so how do we get on the front end of this? I think the same thing. I've got a friend that owns a handful of car dealerships. I think the same thing with projects like Demo. I mean, these feel like very natural sales channels. And so, if Michael can make this a reality, I'm going to be pinging you every couple hours, every day. Please build this. Please build this.
I love it. Uh-oh. Is
Michael
Michael frozen?
Lost Michael.
No, I was just going to ask him where. Oh, there we go. We got Michael back.
All right. Sorry. I wasn't sure if it was me or what, but it looked like my internet.
He heard that people want his new potential product and thought I need to leave before I get pinned down to committing to something.
His website was getting overloaded. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's got a server right behind him in his house. So his whole internet's going down right now because it's getting so busy. Well, so before we close out here, because we're at the hour mark, and I know Twitter will cut out at us. I always give myself an extra 30 minutes, but Twitter will cut out at the 30-minute after mark, whether we like it or not. YouTube and LinkedIn keep going, but Twitter's just like, whatever you schedule, that's all you get. But before we close out though, Michael, Who Loves Burrito? Like, where does that name come from? Because I love burrito, but I'm not sure if it's the same thing.
Typically, people would like burritos with an S, so it's a little different.
Yeah.
If you go to the website, that's great. The story is up there, but I'll try to make a quick story. So when I was a younger man, a long time ago, still cool to wear T-shirts, but I was, one of those guys who wears T-shirts with printed stuff on them all the time. And somehow I found this T-shirt in some store on the internet or something, and it was a shirt that said "Who Loves Burrito" and had like a motorbike on it, just like the logo on my site. Right? The shirt was nonsensical. It didn't make any sense. I don't know if it was like a bad translation or just someone thought it was just hilarious to write nonsensical stuff on a printed shirt, and maybe there was like a series of nonsensical shirts somewhere. But I thought it was awesome, right? And so I bought this shirt, and I wear it all the time. I have friends today that I've known for a year, so every time I see them, it's like, why aren't you wearing the shirt? Because they loved it so much. But what I like to say is that shirt was very important to me for a couple of reasons. One is I just thought it was hilarious, but it also brought a lot of people into my world, because if you wear something absurd like that out in public, people want to know what's wrong with you and why you would wear it, what the shirt's supposed to mean. And they come up and ask, of course, and I go, I have no idea what it means. This is a shirt I bought somewhere, and I thought it was funny to say such a thing. And so when I was coming up with the name for the site, again, years of wearing this shirt. I've now lost the shirt, so I've recreated it for my site if you want to buy it. But I needed a name. I didn't want the name to define what I did, so I didn't call it something with anything that made any sense in the name, just in case I needed to switch gears and do something else. It'd be fun. I could do all kinds of fun things with the burrito mascot, which hopefully I get a chance to do. People remember it. Very few people forget the name once they hear it once, so you can find it easily. It doesn't compete on Google search with anything else. You type in "Who Loves Burrito," you're likely to come right to my site. So there's lots of reasons, but it's just kind of a fun thing. It's supposed to be fun. I'm doing it for fun, so I get a good kick out of it.
Not pigeonholing yourself to the success of a category. I guess I'm not taking this advice here. Is can set yourself up for failure if that category disappears. Hopefully,
you can always change your name. But,
DePIN.
I was ironically, you mentioned these DePIN projects that were around before DePIN was what it is today. We started off as unleashing DY because that term hadn't really been invented yet, and then as soon as Sammy said, "This is what we're going to roll with," and everybody rallied around, "This is what we're going to roll with," I thought, okay, well, I guess that means we're doing a branding change, and had to go through and change all the names on every channel that exists. So it is a real thing.
I have a the proposal now is it's unleashing Burrito, because now you can make it whatever you want. You only change it one more time.
Yeah. Let's unleash the burrito.
No, I like it because it hits a lot of the notes. Anybody who started a business, one of the hardest things to do is to get a domain name. Because as soon as you think of a name, you're like, oh, this name is awesome. This perfectly fits us. And you go look for the domain name and you're like, dang it. And I will tell you, I started a company called Launch Badge. Launch is in launching a rocket and badge is in merit badge. And we went through so many names. And finally, I was just like, fine, internet randomness. Give me 2 random words. And I just hit refresh until one. I was like, I think I can make a story out of that. And when Launch Badge came up, I went and looked at the domain. I'm like, launchbadge.com is available. I'm like, okay, you'll get a merit badge when you launch your company. That's the thing. So we bought a bunch of these like little merit badges we put on a plaque that anytime a company that we work with launches, actually becomes, goes to market, we give them the plaque and say, congratulations, you've launched, you've earned your launch badge. But it was like, it started with the domain name. To be honest, like it was a nonsense domain name that we were just like, I think we can build something around that. But the problem is everybody's like, oh, you guys are Launch Badge.
Yeah.
It's like anything but Launch Badge.
Yeah. The worst thing from a marketing branding set, I'm victim number one on this, is as you begin to invent new words and new terms for things, it can become quite difficult to scale that to mass mind share. There's examples of projects that have been able to do it really successfully, but it can be
like Google.
Google. Yeah. Or like, the Ubers of the world. And these are like names that people kind of know, but don't. They're like, is that real? Or is that just some hodgepodge of different meanings? And so I appreciate you have no time decay consideration on Burrito. Everybody's going to love burritos for the end of time.
In case you were wondering, it was not difficult to get WhoLovesBurrito.com. It was right there, super cheap. Snagged it, and we're set to go. So
actually, on that note, Ken, where did you generate the name for Tashi? Because it is a good, interesting name that is equally unique as potentially something like Uber or Google in a good way. You have an origin story there?
Well, so one of my founders, so 2 of our founders are Sikh, and one of them is very mindful, very smart, wise. He travels the world and knows a bunch of different cultures. And so he was going through a number of names that we could call us, but he wanted to use a word that meant like prosperity or success or something like that in some language. And so he ended up finding this word, which it's a Tibetan word for prosperity. And it was short. That was the big thing, is it was 2 syllables, which was a big thing. And when you say it, almost everybody can spell it. That's one of the hard things is, you might confuse there being a Y at the end, but most people are going to spell it with an I. And once you see it, you know how to say it. And so just really smart guy, spent a lot of time figuring it out. And when he proposed it to me, I was like, all right, I can get behind it. Like it wasn't anything that like emotionally was impactful initially, which also is kind of good because it means it's not emotionally loaded and we can use it and build the emotional value around it. So and the domain name was available. Well, tashi.gg was available, and tashiprotocol.com, I think. So
I love it. Yeah, there's nothing worse than you create this super incredible name. You're like, this is going to go the distance, and then you go, and it's either like $1 million domain. Every project I've ever done has mostly had an IO at the end of it, and I'm almost certain I've gotten an email from the person who owns a .com and is trying to swindle me out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I'm like, we don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars laying around for domains, but good luck.
Well, and that's what it was with. So when we started Hedera, like I did not like the name Hedera. I mean, I'm on record. That was not my choice because it was there. A lot of people spell it Hadera or Hedara. Like it doesn't compute all the time. It's kind of like with Launch Badge. People are like Lunch Badge or Launchpad or something like that. But I remember we went to go look for the domain, and Hedera.com was owned by a like cultivator of Hedera vines, because Hedera is a vine. So it was like, somebody who was into like botanicals and stuff like that had that domain, and it was some little niche place out in the middle of nowhere. They did a quick research and figured out who we were, and that we had raised $150 million. And we're just like, yeah, I'll sell it to you for 70,000. And at the time we didn't do it, but
going back to everything circles back to Silicon Valley, the show. I'm convinced. And the Pied Piper domain was owned by some farmer, and once he found that he was associated with the billion, he wanted to sell it for like $100,000 or some crazy amount. It's funny how all of that comes full circle.
Yeah. But you're absolutely right.
If you guys want WhoLovesBurrito.com, you make your offers. I'm open.
I had one. What was the one that I had? I had a couple of HBAR domains. I had one. My HBAR wallet was a project that I had started, and somebody asked for that domain. Oh, I know what it was. My business partner at Launchbadge and I own the very first public account on Hedera. Because we were the ones that were building the SDKs. So when it came time to launch the public network, we had to run a test to make sure we can create an account. So we got 0.0.1001, which is the very first public account. Everything less than, there's no 1,000, and anything less than 1,000 is a system account. So anything over 1,000, starting with 1,001. So we own that. And we've had people come around and be like, I'll give you $100,000 for that account. And I'm like, nah.
You're like the Satoshi of Hedera.
Yeah, I wish I was the Satoshi of Hedera. I wish that account had some money in it. That's what I wish.
Right.
It's been our developer account for years, so like we use it just kind of like a clearinghouse for all of our business stuff. So money comes into it, immediately goes in exchange, gets cashed out, applied against an invoice, and we pay taxes on it. So,
yeah, that's the fun stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to thank you both for being here. I got a whole bunch more questions for you, Michael and Tyler, but Michael, there's some things I wanted to also bring up, but maybe we'll save that for another conversation. Maybe we'll do it on the Unleashing DePIN call next time we all hop on. But this is our last DePIN Masterminds of the year. We're going to take next week off. We're probably going to take the following week off as well for New Year's. I don't know who's going to be sober or trying to not be sober at that time. And then the following week, so the second week of January, or the second Tuesday, I guess, in January, I guess, is New Year's Tuesday night? That's Tuesday night, right? New Year's Eve?
Checked. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tuesday night.
Then it'll be the first Tuesday of January will be our first return back to DePIN Masterminds. Hopefully we'll have Brandon back on that. And I'm going to get the announcements out early. We're going to have great plans lined up here. Hopefully we can get Michael and Tyler back on the regular because we're really trying to build this community of smart people who are trying to navigate this DePIN space, but do it from like a values first perspective. Like what is actually valuable and what is viable. And this whole discussion has been invaluable to me. So we're going to use that word value a lot in this, in this outro, but I want to thank you both for joining me and adding your expertise. I love getting the context. It helps me kind of align myself in the space and figure out like what are my next steps from a Tashi perspective. We're always going to have other DePIN projects. So there might be an opportunity for us to bring you on with other DePIN projects, and we can kind of grill them a little bit and figure out if they can defend their position and their value as a business. That's what Brandon and I like to do. And when people pass, or even if they don't pass and they go home with some homework, that's useful too. But if they pass, like we're identifying these real projects. And so that's really our goal here. So again, I want to thank you guys for joining me. Everybody have a wonderful Christmas, wonderful New Year's. We're going to go ahead and sign out now, and I'll see you all in the new year.
Thanks for having
me so much, Ken.
All right. Happy holidays.
Thank you.